In this video, we're going to familiarize ourselves with Premiere Pro and just get started creating a new project. And then we'll walk through a couple of other videos that'll help you learn a few more complex ways to edit video. So when you first open Premiere Pro, you're going to hit New Project on the top left. Make sure to name every project you create, because if you don't, it will default to untitled, and then you'll end up with lots of video files named untitled. So you want to name it whatever it is that you're working on. So let's say, welcome to Premiere Pro. That's going to be my name, and then I'm going to hit browse to tell Premiere Pro where to save my project. So I've created a folder inside of my movies folder. You can create folders anywhere you want as long as you know where everything is and you keep everything organized. So I'm going to create this folder here and just hit choose and then hit OK. When Premiere Pro opens up, you're going to see a lot of windows, and I know this can look really intimidating, but don't worry, I'll walk you through all of this, and before you know it, you'll feel a lot more comfortable editing videos with Premiere Pro. So the first thing that you'll notice when this opens up is that there's lots of empty windows here. So I'm going to show you what each of them do, and to do that, it's helpful to get started by just importing some media. There's a lot of different ways to do the same thing in Premiere Pro, depending on the reason you're using Premiere Pro and your workflow. So I'm going to show you just a couple of ways to import media. The first one is to hit File and then to scroll to Import. I'm going to find the folder that I created, and I'm just going to download some B-roll. So the first thing to know about downloading or importing video into Premiere Pro is that if I select this and hit import, then it will import my entire folder. And depending on how you edit in Premiere Pro, you may want to switch to a list view, or perhaps the icon views are more helpful. But for the purposes of what we're doing now, I'm just going to leave it on list view, and then we'll walk through these other icons in a minute. So that's one way to import that. When I drop this down, you'll see these are the B-roll clips that I had. These are video clips that will help me tell my story. Another way that you can do it is to hit File, Import. Then I've already opened this folder here, but if I go backwards and kind of show you from the beginning, if I go into my B-roll folder and actually open it up, this is what's inside. And I may not want to import all of my video. So if I only want to import a few clips, I can highlight the ones that I want to import and just hit import. If you know you want all of your video there, you may just want to import the entire folder. That's up to you depending on what you're working on. So I'm going to drop this down, and you can see, the difference. Once you start importing a lot of video, it's going to get a little hectic if you don't have things organized properly. So I recommend you have a B-roll folder, an interview folder, and all these things to manage your content. So let's go ahead and delete that just by hitting the delete button here. You can tell these are all highlighted. If I click out, I can delete one at a time by hitting this trash button here, or I can highlight them and then delete them all. And that'll help you stay organized as you're editing. The next thing I want to show you about the video that you're importing is that this bin down here will give you a lot of information. And if you want to see more, you can hover here and then extend this and change your workspace a little bit, depending on the information that you need to know. I don't really need to know any of this information here, so I'm just going to pop this back. But there is one notable thing to pay attention to, which is the frame rate. The frame rate here is different, which generally is not ideal for editing in Premiere Pro, unless you kind of know why you have different frame rates. So I'm going to explain just a quick overview of frame rates to help you understand what this column here means. So if you're doing, let's say you're editing a video for a TV show, you're going to use the standard American frames per second, which is 29.97 frames per second. That's basically telling you that inside of 1 second of video, you kind of have almost 30 pictures that when played back to back looks like a moving image, kind of like a flip book. But these here have different frame rates. And so this is almost 60 frames per second. Sometimes people will do this on accident. Other times people will do this on purpose. If you're using a frame rate that's higher than 29.97 and the intent is for this to, let's say, go air on TV, for example, then you could use these frames to create a slow motion effect. You can shoot in higher frames per second, or you can shoot in lower frames per second, depending on if you're trying to create a cinematic look. But all of these things here, those are already coming from my camera. Those are your camera settings. So once you get it into Premiere Pro, you can adjust frame rates. You can adjust the frames per second, but if you don't intend to do something special like this, if you don't really know what you're doing in that area yet, I would recommend you just keep it simple. If you're doing a TV show, for example, 29.97 frames per second is standard. If you are shooting a video on an iPhone, it will usually default to about 30 frames per second, and that's perfect. So that's not a problem at all, but we will talk about frame rates a little bit later. I just wanted to show you what this looks like and what that means. Another way to import content into your bin is to just drag and drop it in there. So you might see people just dragging and dropping video directly into the bin. So that's another way to do that. The next thing I want to show you here is your timeline. We have not created a sequence yet. And in order to do some kind of nonlinear editing, you need to have a timeline, and your sequence settings are really important to understand. So I'm going to, let's say I'm going to get started with my main video. So I'm going to import video of myself just talking. So that'll just be me, presenting on camera. And then I'm also going to import a couple of other things so that you can see the difference between sequences, because this can get really important if you're editing something that's a little bit more complex. In the file names, I've named them to make it a little easier for you to see that they are different sizes. So this video here, and if I want to change it to my icon view, I can see, what these videos are, and I can hover and kind of scroll through that. If I want to see it a little bit bigger, I could do that. I could see the difference between which video is which, so that might be helpful for you to edit that way. You could edit either way. It's just a different option. This one is a 4K video, and this one is HD. So this is important for you to understand when you create a new sequence. Depending on the reason that you're creating the video, you may need different sequence settings. So if you're creating a video that's just a regular HD video and it's going to go on YouTube or social media, then you can just go ahead and, let's say, grab this and drag and drop it right here and create a new timeline. However, if you have other specifications, like let's say you're going to be editing for a TV show or you have other requirements, you may need to do File, New, Sequence, and then you have a lot of different options here depending on what camera you're using and ultimately where this video is going to end up. Just make sure that when you've selected the one that's the right for you, that you name your sequence here. If you don't name the sequence and then you just hit OK, which happens often, if I switch back to this view, you'll see these little icons next to the name that represents the sequence. I can change the name afterward by just single clicking here, and then I can type, whatever, rename the sequence here. That will help because when you save it in your files, the sequence name will come up, and you don't want a bunch of things that are named, sequence 1. So let's go back to this here. And let's exit out of this sequence that I created. We can just toss this one because I just made that as an example. So let's look at this interview. So this is our timeline, and we're going to go up to sequence settings, and you're going to notice that the width is 1920 pixels and the height is 1080. So that's a standard high definition video format. It's also 16 by 9, so it'll work perfectly on TV and on most social media platforms. However, if I mix my media here and I want to add another clip and I drag, let's say, this 4K clip on my timeline, you might notice it's zoomed in a lot because it's a higher resolution. So I could right click here and scale to frame size, and then it's going to scale it to be the frame that I originally created when I told Premiere Pro that this interview was how I wanted to create the sequence. So even if I have 4K video here, and it will look higher resolution because I shot it in 4K. However, when I export this sequence, it will be standard HD. So those are a couple of things that are important for you to know. Just because it might come up where you'll see something that's zoomed in, or for example, we can try the other way around, where let's say I'm going to start with a 4K video and I'm telling Premiere Pro that this is my sequence that I want to create. If I go over to my sequence settings now, I'm going to see that it's not 1920 by 1080. It's 3840 by 2160. It's still 16 by 9, but this sequence is editing 4K video. So if I then move this interview, oops, I've selected both of them. Let me undo that. If I then move this interview over, you can see it looks really small. So there's a couple of things that you can do if this happens to you. It's just because I've told Premiere Pro that as I started the sequence, it's going to be 4K. So I can double click here and I can expand this, or I can move it around, or I can expand this like this and end up filling the screen. Another thing that I could do is I could right click and I can scale to frame size. And normally you won't have any issues after that. Where the issues usually come in is if you're incorporating vertical video. So usually people accidentally will incorporate vertical video. So I'll start with that, and then I'll show you what you need to know if you're intentionally trying to edit something that's vertical for, let's say, like a social media story or something. So I had a section here where where I have vertical video. And you'll see when I drag this clip onto my timeline and create a new sequence, this is vertical. So if I wanted to then add this other interview here, it's a vertical frame. And so this might be what you're trying to do. You might be taking horizontal video and you might be trying to make this a vertical video because your end goal is to maybe leave it on, post it on Snapchat or something like that. And in which case you can do this and that works, but it's important to know where your video is going to end up. So if you're editing for TV, it's going to be 16 by 9. But if you're editing for like a vertical social media story, it's going to be a vertical. It might be a vertical clip like this. So just keep that in mind in case that comes up. Know that anytime you adjust the size by doing this here, you're going to be losing those pixels. So if you zoom way too far in, then it is going to look a little blurrier. Another way that you can do this is in your effects control panel. So if the effects control panel is not selected, let's say maybe it's starting on one of these, you'll just click effects control. And this is where you can scale things in and out. It's the same thing that I was just doing, but you can add numbers. You can move it up and down, left and right by using your effects control here. So hopefully that kind of helps you see how to start a Premiere Pro project and how to identify which timeline is going to be best for you. If you're editing with a specific camera and those sequence settings, the best thing to do is file new sequence. And then you can create, let's say, an AVCHD 1080i 3060i. So that would be like a 29.97 frames per second. And you can read all about these here if you want to learn some more advanced video editing. And it's really helpful when your content matches your sequence, because you might encounter some issues if you don't have that. So if I were to do this, so let's just say test timeline and hit OK. Now you see here's another way to create my sequence or my timeline. And when I go to my sequence settings, you'll notice that these are the sequence settings that I chose that way. So there's a million ways to do the same thing in Premiere Pro. Those are some of the ways to just get started importing video. The last thing I want to show you before we actually start editing is how to manage all of this content here in your bin. So we've already started adding quite a few things. You see there's lots of timelines here. There's lots of videos. There's videos inside of these this B-roll clip. And so it might be helpful for you to create new folders or new bins. So let's say this is where you want your interview, and then you can move this video that we created earlier. Here we imported it, just drag and drop it there. And that will help you stay organized. This was the B-roll clip, and I could move this here. And so that will really help you as you begin to do more complex editing. It'll help you stay organized. It'll help you find things, and it will make you a lot faster. So in the next video, we're going to jump in and show you how to cut and edit video and adjust your audio.